Hey everyone, welcome back to another lesson. So in this one, we're going to continue talking about if and else statements, but we're going to get into more complicated stuff. So before we move forward, I just want to make sure that you understand what we talked about in the previous video and you understand the concept of it. That's very, very important. Make sure you do the practices as well so you get yourself familiar, because as we go down, we're going to get into more complicated stuff. So in this one, we're going to talk about nested if and else statements. Now this is a very, very important concept, and essentially as you go down into programming and as you become a better and better Python programmer, you essentially are going to come across code that is more and more nested and more stuffed together essentially. And that's basically what a nested if and else statement is. For example, if you remember in the beginning sections, we talked about print, right? And then we talked about integers and floats and stuff like that. And then what we did eventually is that when we actually write the code, we kind of nest these things to each other. For example, we have the integer and the input together, right? So this is basically what a nesting is. Obviously, when it comes to an if and else statements, it's a little bit different, but that is the idea. You just kind of crumble the code together. And again, there is a reason for it, because it just makes everything more efficient. Now, a nested if and else statement actually has a lot of uses. For example, you could write this separately if you'd like, but a nested if and else statement actually does have its own purpose. So let's go back to our example, right? We got our code and we're writing this code that is going to ask people what's their height, and then if they pass a certain number, it's going to say whether they qualify for flight school or not. All right, so we got the diagram here, and let's say we want to add another option. So when we ask a question, if they answer no, well, they just can't join this school. But let's say they answer yes, and we want to ask another question. So our question is going to be whether they're older than 16-year-old or not, right? So if the answer is yes, they can join, and if the answer is no, they cannot. So how do you actually do this without opening up a new if and else statement? Because again, if you want to figure something out, and if you have dozens of if and else statements, it's just too many together. It's gonna make the code really complicated. So what you want to do is you want to use the nested if and else statements. So the idea with a nested if and else statement is that it's just going to put a bunch of these things together and spit out the results that you want based on what people enter. All right, so here's how it actually works. In the previous if and else statement, we actually did the very simple one, right? There's an if condition, and then if the condition passes, you run this code, and if it doesn't pass, you run this code, right? So very simple stuff. But a nested if and else statement, by the way, I have the link for you to download this PDF file in the resources section so you can keep it, because this is something that you want to study for a while. This is something that you just want to kind of look at it, visually understand it, because it can get a little bit confusing, especially when you put it in the code. So the idea with a nested if and else statement is that you can have another if and else inside your existing if and else. So if you think about it, this is the original if statement, right? And this is the original else statement, because these are the more outer statements. If you take a look at the indentations, let me go back here. Let me get rid of this as well. So if you go back to indentation, what you see here is that this is the outer if, and then this is the outer else, right? This is the outer conditions. So these are the main ones essentially. So the idea with this is that if the first if passes, we're going to go to the second if. If it doesn't passes, you immediately are going to go to the else statement. It's really that simple, right? So that's pretty much how it works. So if the first one passes, you're going to go to the second if. And if this happens, so for this to happen, for this code to apply, right? For this to happen, both if conditions must be true. So for example, for this green to run, essentially, this needs to be true, and this also needs to be true. So two conditions, right? So if this passes, but if this one doesn't pass, the else inside this nested if and else statement is going to run. So essentially this one. It's pretty simple. So the idea with this is that you have a lot of options, right? You have a lot of options. For example, you could actually run something up here, and if it doesn't pass, it goes all the way down, right? But if it does pass, it's going to check for another statement, and if it does pass, well, it's going to run this code. If it doesn't pass, it's going to run this code. So the idea, again, this is pretty much how you code something like this. You have more options, essentially, right? If this passes, we ask another, this is another condition, essentially, right? And then again, if it passes, it goes to the condition of the if. If it doesn't, it goes to the else, which is like the second else here, right? So this is pretty much how it works. I want you guys to download this resource. I put it for you in the resource section. Make sure you understand exactly how this works, because this has been, at least for me when I started programming, it was one of the biggest like complications. It's simple if and else statements are very easy to understand, but when you actually nest them together like this, they can get really confusing, especially if you're not reading your own code. For example, let's say you get a job somewhere, and you're just working on another project, and you just pull up someone's code and you see all these if and else statements. And again, there is a lot more complications when it comes to if and else, which we'll go over in this section. But like when you look at someone's code, and it can be extremely confusing. So it's really important to understand exactly like the if and else statements the way I just explained, and also like these nested if and else statements and like how they actually work. So one of the things when you want to remember, which is literally the most important thing, is that when you look at the nested if and else, you want to pay attention to the indentations. That's very, very important. So the outer if and else statements are the main ones, essentially, right? And then you go to indenting the inside statements, essentially. So if the first one passes, it's going to go to the second one, and the second one, if it passes, it's going to do this. If it doesn't, it's going to do this, right? So this is essentially how it works. Now let's actually turn our code into that again. So we got a simple code here, and we want to turn it, we're going to basically ask another question, right? So the way we do this is that we are going to first, after the print, we're going to ask for another question, right? Their age. That's what we're going to program. So if you remember, we want to program this. So we're going to ask if, well, let's first of all ask it for their age, right? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say age equals, as you see, I'm nesting it inside this. That's really, really important to remember, guys. So if age, so first of all, let's get the age. We're going to get integer, and we're going to get the input, right? And we're going to say, here we go. Right. So integer input, and we're going to say, what is your age? So let's close this as well. So here we go. So we're asking for someone's age, right? So what is your age? And then we're going to open another, we're going to go down here again. If you again remember, you are still in the same same line here. Indentation is very, very important. All right, so we're going to say if age or less than or equals 16, print you don't qualify for flight school. And we're going to say else. Obviously we want our else to be in the same level as if, and we're going to print you qualify for flight school. So now I could be a little bit more creative with the example, because these are messages are kind of the same, really, but well, let's actually be more creative. You are below required age. Well, actually, no, this one, right? You don't qualify. You are below the required age, and you don't qualify. There you go. So I just want to be more creative, because we want to make sure that we understand which message is coming out. So I want you to pay attention. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. I want you to pay attention. So we, again, originally start with the main if and else statement, which is, again, it's this one, right? And this one. So if this passes, we're going to go to the second section. But if it doesn't, you immediately gonna show them this. You don't qualify for the flight school. Your height is the below requirement. I apologize for my horrible spelling, so I'm just trying to be quick about this, you know, so we don't take your time. So again, if this doesn't pass immediately, we're going to go to this. So this argument is not going to even run, right? But if it does pass, we're going to print something. We're going to say you qualify, so let's ask for the age. So now one of the things that obviously, if you want to make it cleaner, we can just get rid of this entirely, because if they are qualified for the height, at least, we just want to go to the next question, right? We don't want to like show a message. So that is really up to you based on the program you're making. But in this case, I'm actually not going to show a message. So we're going to say if they are over 150, we're going to ask for age. What is your age? And if they're below 16, you are below the required age, you don't qualify for the flight school. If they are over, else means that if they are over 16, you qualify for the flight school. And again, that's pretty much it. So if you actually take a look at it, I want you to again remember nested statements. That's very, very important. This is the original and this is the original else. So if this doesn't work, this is going to run immediately. But if it does work, we're going to go to the next one, which is a you know, variable. Like we're just going to like get some information. And then there's another if inside this, right? So we're going to say, hey, what is your age? If the age is over 16, you are below the required age. Or below 16, you are, if you're 16. Well, let's actually make this less than 16. So because we want the 16-year-old people to qualify, right? So if you're below 16, you're going to be below required age. But if you are, you qualify for the flight school. All right, so let's run this and see how this does. So what is your height? I'm going to say, for example, 180. So that means I qualify. And what is your age? I'm going to say 21. So you qualify for a flight school, just like that. Very simple, right? Let's actually run one more time and let's see if we can actually find any problems. For example, I'm going to say 150. So that means I do qualify. So let's say someone's 16. Do they qualify? You qualify for flight school. Great. So like, see guys, this is how it works. This is how we write a code like this with nested statements. Essentially, we have multiple if and else inside each other. Now you can get really, really crazy with an if and else statements, like especially nested if and else statements. You can have a lot of them inside each other, like as many as you want really. But in the next lesson, I want to actually talk about a more cleaner way to actually format this, and we're going to go to Elif statements. All right, so let me know if you have any questions. We're going to have a practice later on to practice all of this stuff. Just make sure you understood this and you practice this. Get used to coding. That's, as I said, coding is like a muscle. You just want to work it out and you want to, like, you know, use it. That's very, very important. So let me know if you have any questions. If not, I'll see you in the next lesson.